Hi everyone. In this lecture, I'm going to be talking about Chapter 11 and the urinary system. And I just want to give you a heads up that this is not by any means a thorough review of the urinary system. My main objective here is to just give you a really short description of the anatomy and function of the organs of the urinary system. And a lot of my motivation for doing this is I wanted to do the fetal pig dissection virtual labs for review for the end of the semester. And they talk a little bit about the urinary system. So I'm going to go over some of the major parts here. We just don't have time to do all the parts and all the functions and the physiology related to it. But at least you'll get a foundation that will allow you to build on it if you go take another higher level course. So the urinary system is, it says the organ system of the body that plays a major role in maintaining salt, water, and pH homeostasis of the blood. And so it turns out that all day long, your urinary system is filtering your blood and taking out different chemicals, salts, balancing water, balancing pH, and taking out all sorts of molecules out of your blood that would be toxic to our blood if they accumulated. And to take out these chemicals, you have to also take out water. And so it's really important for your urinary system to balance water in the process. And so the organs of the urinary system carry out a process called excretion, and excretion is removal of metabolic waste, and that's as opposed to the solid waste that the digestive system is removing. So the urinary system removes metabolic waste, which is chemical waste, and the digestive system removes the solid waste. And this is, this is what happens to us all day long. Whatever food you eat, you can't continue to accumulate all the nutrients, all the chemicals in those food. Some of them have to be released from your body. So that's what the urinary system is doing all along. And this diagram is kind of interesting to look at. It's really important how the urinary system is essential in homeostasis because it's functioning, it's working with other parts of the body. And here we're showing you the heart and the blood circulation, and food is going in, air is going in, bringing oxygen in, and carbon dioxide is being generated. So that's leaving through the respiratory system. And then down here, we have the kidneys of the urinary system that are cleaning that blood. So food's going in, nutrients are going into the blood, oxygen's going in, and all this blood is circulating through the body and being scrubbed by the kidneys. So the kidneys are removing metabolic wastes, and that waste is lost as urine. The solid waste is lost as feces. So the kidneys are balancing out the nutrients in that blood and helping the blood maintain a constant composition or homeostasis. So the primary metabolic wastes that humans make are primarily these nitrogenous wastes, which mean wastes that contain nitrogen, chemicals that contain nitrogen. And three that you might have heard of are urea, creatinine, or four of them, I'm sorry, creatinine, ammonium, and uric acid. And it says urea is a waste product of amino acid metabolism. Remember, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. So when you eat protein, you're going to generate urea as a waste product. If we accumulate too much nitrogen, we'll throw off our homeostasis. So it's important that that we get rid of these extra nitrogenous products. Where the urea comes from is when you break down proteins, we actually make ammonia. And if you've ever smelled ammonia in a container, it's really easy for you to imagine that that could be toxic. And so very quickly, the liver takes ammonia and makes urea. And urea is less harmful, but it's not harmless. And so what the kidneys do then is they scrub this urea out of the blood and keep that nitrogen concentrate, keep the urea concentration in the blood constant. And it says here, if you have too much urea, they call it uremia, you can get cardiac arrhythmia, meaning your heart's going to beat irregularly, vomiting, respiratory problems, and potentially death. So when people have kidneys that aren't working, these are the kind of things that kill you, that you accumulate these metabolic wastes that contribute to death. There's another nitrogenous waste called creatinine, and it's a waste product from the breakdown of creatine phosphate. And I like to mention that because sometimes you hear about people taking creatine phosphate as an energy supplement. You remember we talked a little bit about ATP. Well, sometimes the energy in ATP is stored as creatine phosphate in our muscles. And when we break that down, we generate this stuff called creatinine, and that needs to be removed from our blood. And then the last one, the last nitrogenous waste I wanted to mention is uric acid. And uric acid is also, again, a waste product that's generated from metabolism, particularly from the metabolism of nucleotides, from the building blocks of DNA and RNA. And so, you eat food, there's going to be DNA in there. So we're going to generate uric acid. We're going to generate, uric acid. Now, it turns out if you have too high of uric acid, it's a sign that your kidneys aren't working correctly. And it causes a condition called gout. Too much uric acid will actually start crystallizing. And you can imagine if you're building crystals in your blood, they're heavy and they settle down, either they settle into joints where the blood kind of slows down, or go all the way down to your feet. And these crystals will be in your tissues and in your blood, and it causes this painful condition called gout. And if somebody has gout, it's a good sign that they're having a problem with kidney function or with this function of their urinary system. So we talked a little bit about how the urinary system maintains a water-salt balance, and the salts in particular are sodium and potassium, and it's really important that we balance sodium, potassium, and water to keep to regulate our blood pressure and to balance just our water concentration in general. The pH of our blood should be around 7.4, and so the kidneys are very good at discriminating pH and figuring out, do we need to get rid of hydrogen ions and make our pH of our blood a little bit more alkaline, or do we need to keep hydrogen ions and make our blood a little bit more acidic? So it's going to be a really important process for the kidneys to maintain normal blood pH, because again, if our blood pH changes much from 7.4, it can be deadly. Here it says the urine pH usually has a pH of 6 or lower, because we tend to eat more acidic foods than alkaline foods, but that pH will be influenced by what foods you eat. The organs of the urinary system are in this diagram, and I'm just going to go over those organs and their functions. In the rest of the chapter, there's a lot more detail about these organs and how they function, but I'm not going to go into all those details. So we're just going to do the really basics here. So here's the urinary system. It's remember the biggest vein in the body, the vena cava, and the biggest artery in the body, the aorta. And they go all the way, we looked at them with the heart, but they go all the way down into the abdominal cavity where the kidneys are located. So here's the vena cava and the aorta. And branching off of them, we see what we call the renal vein and the renal artery. When you hear those words renal, you're talking about kidneys. So the kidneys are attached directly to the aorta and the vena cava. And there's two kidney bean-shaped kidneys, that's why they're called kidney beans, roughly about the size of your fist. And we can live quite well with just one, but I think the fact that we have two tells us how important they are, although we don't have two brains. I don't know if that really tells us how important they are. It just happens, we just happen to have two for some reason. But, which is kind of nice, because if you damage one or you, something happens, you want to donate one, you can function just fine with just one. And so the kidneys are the actual place where the urine is produced. And so here's the blood being delivered from the aorta to the kidneys. And it's not just being delivered to the kidney to keep the kidney alive, it's being delivered there to be filtered. So the kidney's filtering that blood all day long. And once the blood is filtered, it's put back into the vena cava. And so we have this constant filtration of the blood. And so it's the kidneys that are able to produce the urine. So the other thing you notice here is up here on the kidney, there's a gland called the adrenal glands. And a lot of people heard of the adrenal glands because we know about adrenaline. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the little bit we'll do on the endocrine system. Once the kidneys make the urine, that urine is transported to the ureters, and the ureters have peristaltic contractions. Remember, our esophagus and our stomach and our intestines can kind of do this rhythmic contraction of moving um, liquid or moving substances down them. And so it does two things. It keeps the urine moving, and it keeps it moving in one direction. It's supposed to prevent the movement of direction of urine backwards into the kidney. So the urine should just go down the ureters into the bladder. And there's a ureter coming from each kidney. So the ureters are involved in transporting urine. You might hear about people getting kidney stones that can be really painful, and they can be in the kidney, but they can also be in the ureters. And the ureters have a really small 5 millimeter, less than a quarter of an inch diameter. And so you get a little kidney stone in there. It can be really quite painful. The urine is then transported to the bladder, and the bladder just stores it until it's ready to be released. And to release the urine, it goes through the urethra, which is the tube that leaves the bladder. So the bladder actually has 3 holes, 2 ureters coming in and 1 urethra coming out. In males, the urethra goes all the way through the penis, so it's much longer. I wanted to show you something about the urinary bladder, and I don't think this is necessarily in your notes or going to be asked on one of the questions, but I think it's kind of cool to look at. Here's a cross-section of the urinary bladder, and there's actually 2 sphincter muscles. Remember, sphincter muscles are round muscles that close a tube. And so there's one right here at the bladder, and then there's one here in the urethra. So the internal and the external sphincter. So what happens is when the bladder is full to a certain point, your nervous system sends some information that opens this internal sphincter. And so once that internal sphincter is open, that's when you can sense that, I have to go to the bathroom. So your nervous system decides that. One part of your nervous system. Another part of your nervous system controls the external sphincter. And it's that external sphincter that we have some control over. So you can kind of retain your urine until you actually want to release it. And I think it's interesting because it's this nervous system connection that has to happen before a child can actually be potty trained. They have to be able to their nervous system has to be sophisticated enough to be able to actually control that external sphincter. So you've got to have the neurons in place, and it's a developmental thing. If you have somebody who says their baby is potty trained at 6 months, it's probably that actually the parent is watching all the cues in the kid and knows, when this kid has to go to the bathroom, because they've seen that, they go to the bathroom after they eat, or they go to the bathroom at a certain time of the day, or they make a certain face or something. But the child actually is not able to control that external sphincter when they're too young, because their nervous system hasn't connected those neurons yet. So that's something developmental. So there's some other things here, lots of other interesting things on the urinary system. But let's see, you should be able to answer questions 1 and 3, and even question 2. There's some in there that you should be able to answer. And I'm going to stop there on urinary system.